Wanted to point out, I'm looking at the map here of the radar. Florida's pretty wet right now, and they're not even anywhere near the eye of the storm just yet. Although it is moving. I just saw. Speaking of the environment and the like, I just saw a story yesterday online about homes that are off the grid, and some are big, and some are these. There's this tiny house movement where people want to live in a box. But there's this house that sits on one of the islands down in the Florida Keys. The island is so small, there's really only room for this one big mansion. But everything is run off the grid, even though it's an enormous mansion. And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, a lot of fun to live at, I'm sure, on a great many days when, the trade winds are blowing through and it's nice and cool there in the middle of summer or even winter. But when you get a storm like this blowing through, you could wake up in the morning and you could be floating at sea. It's 9:24. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. Our weather is going to be a little bit better over the next several days. We'll see a return to temperatures starting tomorrow into the 70s into the beginning of next week. However, we'll be down in the 30s tonight. When you go to bed tonight, you might remember to pull out that extra comforter. And again, I keep telling you, if you have not yet tested your furnace, you better do it now, because when you get to that first really bitter cold night, you don't want to flip it on and find out there's an issue. In fact, I have a little light coming on that says replace ball. I got to figure out what that means. And we're not talking about, baseball or anything like that. Cold winter, right around the corner, really, when you think about it. Whether you need repairs right away or would like to avoid problems in the future, call the pros at Ramsey Heating and Electric. The team at Ramsey's will make sure the job is done right and the first time. Problem free. Cozy winters, that's cozy. I've got to make sure I say that without an R. Cozy winters are found at Ramsey Heating and Electric, 2600 Overland Avenue in Burley. Telephone number 678-0459. That's Ramsey Heating and Electric, where they sell warm winters and cool summers. It's 9:26 now and 44. We're on our way today, supposedly, into the middle 60s. We'll see. I doesn't feel it just yet. It should get a little bit better. Got a couple of quick things I wanted to mention in this segment of the program. It's a shorter segment, so I thought I might be able to get a quick mention of these. Story coming out of Massachusetts and coming to a state near you, because these laws are taking place all over the country. There is a new law in Massachusetts passed by liberals in the state legislature, but signed by a Republican governor. Well, if you're a Republican governor of Massachusetts, you're generally, oh, well, he's a moderate. No, you're just a liberal with a Republican label. He ended up signing this into law. You can now go to jail if you use what the state considers wrong pronouns when addressing people with gender identity disorder. I saw a woman, I think it was a woman the other night. I was watching, I confess, I was watching Idaho Public Television, and there was some sort of, well, they don't do anything fancy. They just throw up a curtain like it's 1954. They put a couple of cheap old chairs from the 1960s from somebody's den in the center of the room. And then they sit around and say, well, yes, the governor and the legislature this year should come to an agreement on spending more money for all of the liberal programs we have because it's the right thing to do. And I saw her on television, and I say her, I think, how do you know sometimes? So because I don't know if I should call her sir or ma'am, I guess those are somewhat quaint anyway. Yo, maybe yo works. In this day and age, especially young people, it would be just fine. But what if it's a she and I call her Mister? Would I then go to jail or vice versa? The law mostly applies to businesses that serve the general public, and this is the caveat that I need to mention. However, according to guidance from the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination, another one of those Orwellian institutions that we've now got in this country, churches that hold secular events like a spaghetti dinner open to the general public are under the statute during such events. The commission is the state agency tasked with creating policies to enforce the law. So, if your pastor walks up and says to that person who was on Idaho Public TV the other night, let's just say she's visiting Massachusetts to commune with fellow liberals there, it is sometimes called the People's Republic, and your pastor walks up and says, well, sir, would you like to have a chair? How dare you? How dare you? I'm not sure that she knows what she is anyway, but she could then file a complaint, and that pastor could go to jail. Naturally, the writer says, this is from the Resurgent. I'm reading this out of the Resurgent.com today. Naturally, the writer says the Associated Press completely ignored the whole thing about the clergymen and clergywomen going to jail when it did its report on the law over the weekend. And the writer says, remember, when LGBT militants said they wanted tolerance, the writer says, I guess they replaced that with using the state to attack people who say things we don't like. But that's our future. And the problem with liberals today is they think that religion is just superstition, and they think it's their job to rid the world of superstition so you can put your faith where it belongs in big government and big debts that we'll never be able to pay off, and the eventual collapse of all civil society and people just eating each other in the streets. But by gosh, when you're eating them, make sure you call them by the right pronoun, or we'll eat you twice. 9:30. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. It's 44. It's 45. Since we're talking a little bit about faith issues, a couple more items on that coming up in a few minutes. If you listen to Todd Starnes' updates here on KLIX, at my last radio station, I introduced those to our programming. We had, when I got there, we were an ABC affiliate, and then I insisted we switch to Fox because I thought it would be better for branding purposes of what we were doing. And lo and behold, our company president, a guy, well, you may remember him when he was at CBS, he was named David Schumacher. And then he discovered that his ancestors from Alsace-Lorraine were actually French speakers. So he, in mid-career, changed his name to David Schumacher. He was actually a conservative. He was one of those people working in network news for many, many years who was a conservative. But see, he'd flown with Strategic Air Command. There's a huge difference there between those two. I got one on the brain because of another issue, another topic going on. But he flew with Strategic Air Command for 6 years and then ended up working in the newspaper business, quickly moved over to television, was in local TV for a very brief period and got hired at CBS, and was a conservative behind the scenes for many years. So he understood what I was talking about, but he was also a businessman, and we discovered that Fox required less from us to run Fox News than ABC did, so we quickly made the switch. And then I had an opportunity to start running Todd Starnes with his commentaries, and we did the same thing because we felt that it really echoed with the conservative audience. If you're not familiar with Todd Starnes, he is a master of all trades. He does radio, he does television, he writes a newspaper column. He's a very, very busy man, but he's also a man of very devout faith. And call it evangelical. I think that would be a good way to put it. And he may not look at himself and define himself quite that way, but I think it's the closest description that would make sense. You may have heard him already mention this because sometimes when I see these things that are already published online, he's already mentioned them in his commentary. So if you've got KLIX on all the time, you're familiar with this about the teachers in Georgia being told to remove religious items from classrooms. I had a friend many, many years ago who was a teacher. He was a Lutheran, but he was teaching in a Catholic school. And I said, were you uncomfortable? He said, no. He said, I thought it was great that there was a crucifix over every classroom door. Amen. But Starnes is telling us about this school district, and it comes from a place called Henry County, Georgia. Now, Georgia used to be a very conservative state. It's more purple now because Atlanta, Macon, Augusta, Savannah, they've all grown greatly. And it's just like we see here in Idaho. When people start moving in from San Francisco because they want this rural living, then they get here and say, but you know what else we need? Yeah. And so let's go shake down the taxpayers for some money to pay for that. That's what's happening in Georgia, and it's becoming a much more liberal place. Mr. Hardin, this is the fellow who works for the school. Mr. Hardin seems to think the U.S. Constitution, according to Starnes, mandates that teachers must voluntarily relinquish their rights at the schoolhouse door. The school district will still allow teachers to wear religious jewelry as long as it's not overt or way out there. This is the quote, overt or way out there. Well, What is overt? Is wearing a crucifix around your neck, is that overt? Now, I know some people who wear really large crucifixes. Are they going to have somebody there with a tape measure as the teachers come into school in the morning? Wait a minute. It's like goaltenders in hockey. You can have a certain limit on the size of your leg pads, but if they're too large, they'll come out. You can actually, a coach, if he thinks the other guy, the goaltender in the other team's net, that his pads are too big. And why do they wear oversized pads? Because they're cheating, because it's a better way to stop the puck. So he can call the referee over to the bench and say, I want a measurement. And then they'll do a measurement. And if the other team's goaltender, his pads are too big, the other team pays a price for that. There's a penalty involved. Generally, you have to switch goaltenders, and your starter has to go back to the dressing room and change to smaller pads. Well, are they going to have someone at the schoolhouse door who measures the size of the crucifix around your neck? Or if it has diamonds on it, will that be considered offensive? Or if it has, just a little inlay of any other type of jewelry, will that be offensive? How about people who have tattoos, a crucifix perhaps on a bicep? Will that be considered offensive? I'm not a tattoo guy. I don't know anyone who would want one. And from a Jewish tradition, you're not supposed to get one. And if you did, well, it condemns you. Some, depending on which branch of Judaism you're looking at, some Jews don't believe that there's a heaven. But those who do believe that if you get a tattoo, that you've just canceled your trip. But as Christians, that's your choice. And I'm not arguing any one way or another against it. I'm just telling you my personal choice is no tattoos. But they can wear things that are small trinkets, according to this fellow, Mr. Hardin, who laid down the law. They cannot have a Bible sitting on top of their desk, or they cannot have some other type of religious doctrine sitting on their desk. Well, if you just have it sitting there because when the kids are off at lunch, you want to sit at your desk and read the Bible, is that wrong? Or would it harm some student to actually see it on your desk because they might say, I wonder what that is? Well, they may go home then and say to their mother, there was a Bible on teacher's desk today. What's that all about? How dare you expose my child to a closed Bible on your desk? Now he's going to have some ideas about salvation and being nice to other people and doing the right thing. We in my liberal household object to that because the government will take care of all of our needs. They also, this guy was asked if there was a Bible in the school library. And this is like the superintendent of the school, right? He said he didn't know. I don't know. I never read the darn thing. Well, that's why they put me in charge. 10 minutes away from 10 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 45. I don't have any moral formation. So somebody came along and said, you're absolutely what we want leading our children. Meanwhile, some people don't have any patience for this sort of thing. But then again, you're thinking, how can I get my children into a private school or homeschool them? Well, in Nevada, that's getting easier because if you live just across the state line, you're going to have a voucher program that will allow you to make that choice on your own. You would think that if Nevada does it, that somebody within our own state legislature will actually say, you know what, we can do that. We can go forward with a program more so like this. But they won't do it because the editorial writers over at the Idaho Statesman may not like it, and then they'll call me bad names, and I'll be embarrassed to go out in public. So, your Republicans, of course, who come to the job, I guess, as spineless amphibians, who would normally support something like this. I'm not trying to say this is everybody. I know it's a generalization, but there are some people like that who are serving in government. Can we be honest about that? I think we're well aware of who they often happen to be. They essentially, everything they do is decided by wetting an index finger and sticking it in the air and seeing which way the wind is blowing. Like Tim Kaine, the Democrat running for vice president, Oh, I'm a Christian. Yeah. Listen to him the other night use the Bible to justify abortion as he's trying to interrupt Mike Pence, who's speaking.
Made the heartbreaking choice to end a pregnancy.
And why did Donald Trump say that?
We just never would.
Why did he say that?
Well, look, look, he's not a polished politician like you and Hillary Clinton. And so,
well, I would
don't
admit
always
that's not
come
a
out exactly
thought.
the way he means
well,
them, but
can
I'm telling you what other policy of our administration
Great
would be.
line from the Gospel of Matthew. From
what,
the fullness of the heart, the mouth speaks.
Yeah.
When Donald Trump says women should be punished, or Mexicans are rapists and criminals, or John McCain's not a hero, he is showing you who he is.
Senator, you whipped out that Mexican thing again.
So there you go. A devout Roman Catholic, at least he says he is, bringing grave scandal to his church, Tim Kaine. I'm sure he could get communion, though, over at St. Edward. But most churches should be standing up to this guy because he's misrepresenting their faith. 9:53, Bill Colley with you on Top Story, and I believe we have a caller with us. Telephone number 736-0300, News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com, and you're up next. You're on Top Story.
Yeah, Bill, you sure pushed all my buttons today. I was going to say accept abortion, but you even covered that. But I was going to say on the transgender or homosexual pronouns, they should just contract she, he, it. And I'll say the first part, she, and then it, I guess. And there was a great movie on last night on Turner Classics, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington.
Yeah, I love that.
Underlies everything you were saying today. I think Trump ought to take that and say, Mr. Trump goes to Washington.
Yeah, and thank you for the call. Despite, as I say, we always seem to qualify, yeah, I know Donald Trump's got some issues. On the other hand, we need somebody who's going to go in there and kick some people in the tails. I thought it would be Ted Cruz or Rick Perry or Bobby Jindal. But at this stage of the game, I'll definitely take Donald Trump. If there's anything that you can say about him is he's not going to be worried about what some editorialist says about him when he's president of the United States. 9:54, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and News Radio. I was listening to some of his speech from Reno yesterday. For a guy who's supposedly in so much trouble, according to the mainstream media, he's not changing his style whatsoever. Coming up on 9:55 this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. There was a fellow I worked with at a radio station back in the 1990s. God bless him. He passed away a little over a year ago from cancer. And up until that point, I thought he'd been one of the healthiest people I'd ever known. But we had a security guard at the radio station. We were on the second floor of a building. We rented the space at the time. And it was difficult. It's like that Saturday Night Live character, Pat. It was difficult to tell if it was a man or a woman. But she gave my friend a ticket one day because he was in a hurry and he ran up the escalator. And she said it would damage the gears, and she gave him a ticket. Now, this was not enforceable. It's not like he had to go to court or anything for doing that. But he started referring to her as Shim around the office. Today, people, oh, Bill, that wasn't very nice. If those are the type of people come on, lay off. It's not like he went down and punched her in the face, but he called her Shim, and because he couldn't tell. And at the time, you think 1990 when this was happening, he could get away with that. But if he said it today, they'd haul him away. He'd be out of a job. He'd be disgraced. They'd put him on a blacklist. He'd never work in broadcasting again. It is such a sad, just jokes we used to tell in the locker room at school. Whoa, how dare you do that? Well, it was 35, 40 years ago. Oh, but how dare you do that? Well, we're guys. That's what guys do. Yes, but it's not very nice. And you need to be more like Phil Donahue. Remember the Alan Alda Institute, the funny commercial that they used to air on Limbaugh? Yeah, my wife. That was great. Wonderful. But I've got to wrap up shortly. I do want to mention our friend Dr. Eric F. Jones, who uses a holistic systemic approach to wellness. Look, in this day and age, we've got pharmaceutical companies that are making a fortune off of just filling you with drugs. The question is, do you need all of them? Probably not. So he says he's going to restore your health to a degree by using more traditional methods. He's been doing this since 1993 with master's and doctoral degrees in marriage and family therapy. Dr. Eric F. Jones uses methods of alternative healing such as naturopathy, medicinal herbs, nutrition, sound waves, intellectual and cognitive self-regulation, and napathy to help remedy and manage mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual challenges. And he's currently accepting new patients and has evening and Saturday appointments available. Telephone number 731-7178. And Dr. Jones is also on Facebook. The name of his group, Eric F. Jones, PhD, mental health and wellness therapist, Eric with a C. Quickly, I didn't get a chance to mention this earlier. Today is, and I don't know how many places this is taking place around the country, but the family research, it was focused on the family, encouraged young people, including teachers, I assume, although they're more in peril about this than the students, to take their Bibles to school today. Just carry them with you. And the thinking is that if somebody stops and asks you, you have you're not forcing it upon anyone, but it offers you an opportunity to testify. Proselytize is what they call it, right? But you're not forcing it upon anyone. So you're hopeful that someone took advantage of that today, and that, if it's just one person whose life is turned around, that it's a job well done. God willing, if the creek don't rise, I'm going to be back in this chair tomorrow morning between 8 and 10 o'clock in the morning. Rush Limbaugh following the news in just a few minutes at 10 o'clock here on News Radio 1310 KLIX.